Yeah, started. It's live.
Okay. But I think we're still waiting for people to join. Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on a Sunday afternoon evening. We really hope that it's worth you taking the time out to meet not just all the people who've written for the publication that we're here to launch today, but also those who have taught and worked with them, not just this year, but in previous years as well. So welcome from the Young India Fellowship to the launch of the final draft, which is the Journal of YIF Student Writing. And we have had a launch like this in the past, but this one is unique because we are finally going to not just read what the authors have to say or look at the work the artists have put in, but also hear from them and dive deeper into the process of how this magazine came about. But before we go into that, a little bit of background and context into the YIF Critical Writing Program and Final Draft. Writing has been essential to the Ashoka Project and to the Young India Fellowship from the very inception. It was part of the imagination of the founders of the program and the academics involved with it, that all Young India Fellows, regardless of background and context, would write. But what would they write? And what would we teach? And what validity would it have for people who came from different backgrounds and were looking to go into different kinds of jobs and work? And that has been the journey that a lot of the faculty that you see on the screen today have actually undertaken with a lot of their students that you also see on the screen today. And that has been a journey where people have experimented with genres, they've experimented with voice. There have been debates on everything from plagiarism and citation to the use of grammar, to the space for politics, to self-expression, to bilingualism and multilingualism. And in all of this, there has been almost equal teaching and learning, regardless of whether they were faculty or students or peers to each other. And that is what has made it a very, very exciting journey, not just for me personally as one of the founding teachers of writing of the Young India Fellowship, but also very much to observe and watch as somebody who's been on the sidelines for the past few years as the program has just grown and grown in strength. The writing program at the YIF started off like many other YIF courses as a 6-week project. Became very clear that wasn't going to work. It became a 12-week project the year after that. And today, fellows engage with this course almost through their academic year. So 5 out of 8 terms are dedicated to writing. And why does it take this much time and effort? Is because it's the one space where critical thinking, close reading, deep reflection, endless drafts of writing, endless debate, review, discussion, occasional heartburn are meant to be part of the curriculum, are meant to be part of the process. And what emerges from it is what is truly delightful. And that led to us wanting to put together a very unique journal of student writing, which is actually multidisciplinary. There are many journals of student writing, but they're often embedded in a domain or a discipline. They're peer-reviewed journals, or they are writing done when people are no longer students. But to take student writing, multidisciplinary student writing, multi-genre, multi-voice, multi-approach, and with a plethora of subject matter that fellows deal with, and to put it all together into one publication has been our endeavor. And this is the 3rd edition of Final Draft that we're pulling out. Last year, because of the setback that COVID put on all of us, we couldn't bring out the journal in time. And therefore, this year actually has the work of 2 consecutive batches of the Young India Fellowship in it. It's a thicker journal, but well worth the time, because the authors here have reflected on everything from the deeply personal to the political, to the natural environment, to migration, to gender, to caste and education, to zoos, there is just something for everyone to read. And I really hope you all who attend will take the time to do that. Before I go forward, I also want to thank all the people for whom I'd like to think it's been a labor of love, but I do know that it's also been a lot of work. And those are the writing faculty, most of whom are here, but also Shiv and Pratik, who are not here, but also contributed huge amounts of their time and effort. And in Pratik's case, even to the previous edition. But Satyendra, Ratna, Shayon, Anunay, Monishita, Krishtijit, and Harsh have also really been part of this journey for months on end. And those of you who are authors also know the work they have put in with you at the back end. So a minute there. It's a bittersweet launch for us because it's both my pleasure and a little bit my sorrow to introduce the person who's been our assistant director of critical writing for the last year, Dr. Monishita Hajra Pandey, who has now left us for greener fields and to take up a permanent position. And we wish her the very best in her journey. But Monishita has shepherded this whole process from the beginning right up until today. And I think till even minutes before, was closely in touch with all of us who are here for this launch today. So I hand it over to Monishita with thanks. Monishita, over to you.
Thank you so much, Aniha. So today is 5th September and it's Teachers' Day. So I must begin with a warm, hearty congratulations to all the teachers and students who are here with us today. So wish you a very happy Teachers' Day. And as Aniha has pointed out, this particular issue is very special and it's being launched today on the Teachers' Day because we are trying to foreground students' voice in this issue. In a while, we'll get into the details of this particular issue where you will look at the collaborative work that not only goes on in the critical writing program at YF, but that's very much reflected in our final draft edition 3 as well. In fact, today we are calling this event Looking Back at Critical Writing, Final Draft Authors in Conversation with Critical Writing Faculty. So we have around 7 of our authors out of the 20 authors today with us who are going to share their journey with us. It's going to be a conversation between students and their teachers. And we also have Tirat and Sanmati, the 2 designers who are also from the batch of 2019.
इसलिए तो मैं आपसे 3 दिन से पीछे पड़ा हूँ अपने सर से.
Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, I mean, that's the spirit with which we are launching the 3rd edition of Final Draft on Teachers' Day. Let's now directly get into the launch. Tirat, would you like to share the screen and show us the cover of Final Draft 3.0?
Just a second. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So this is the cover of our Final Draft edition 3. And I would like to invite my colleague Anunay to take us through the cover and, you know, all the work that's gone behind it.
Thank you for that, Monishita. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the launch of the 3rd edition of Final Draft. There isn't much for me to say. You can see we have gone with a very sort of colorful and yet minimal design for the cover this year. If you have had a chance to look at our previous covers, you'll see that we always end up going in a different direction. It of course largely depends on the designers who so far in all 3 editions have been fellows. So they sort of put their own spin on it, their own touch on it. And every year we end up with something completely different and yet wonderful in its own way. So that's about it. I don't think I need to labor the point when it comes to the bubbles on the cover. I'm sure pretty much everybody who's here with us on this call has at some point used the bubble analogy, the bubble metaphor for Ashoka for the program. and Tirath and Sanmadi have done a great job sort of representing that familiar metaphor for us on the cover of this edition of Final Draft.
Thank you, Anunay. We could now take a look at the introduction to this edition. So we'll come back to the contents page in a while. As the title and the subtitle highlights, it's a kind of a conversation between the students' perspective, what the critical writing journey is for them, and the teachers in the critical writing program, what they do in their classrooms. And hence we've titled it A Dialogic Journey to the Final Draft and the Writing Process and Pedagogic Choices. We have, it's a little different this time, the introduction. If we can move on to the first page. We have really experimented with the genre of introduction as well, which is quite reflective of what we do in our classrooms, where we are trying to bring a variety of styles, genre, texts, medium, material into the classroom to ensure that the criticality in the critical writing process gets explored as much as possible. And we thought it might be a good idea for us to actually try that out in our introduction, bring the visual component, the student's voice into the introduction through the panels, as you can see here, and the voices of the teachers, our inner voices of conflict, of multiple choices that are available to us as writing instructors, as teachers in our contexts, which is a constant inner struggle of what kind of choices are we making in the classroom and what impact does it have on the students' experience in the classroom. So you can see a lot of that coming together in the introduction in this edition, and we hope you will enjoy reading it. It's an experiment. We are very excited to present it to you. Anunay, maybe you could talk a little bit about how we stumbled upon this idea, through our designers, actually.
Well, to let you guys all in on a secret, the main reason we went with a visual introduction was because we did not want to write a long textual one another year. Yes, as it turns out, writing faculty are equally averse to writing sometimes. But having said that, this year we wanted to be really experimental, and Tirath came up with this whole idea of showing the journey of an assignment and what it looks like from the perspective of a fellow. What are the various steps involved in working on an assignment, right from the point where it is given out, to brainstorming, to peer discussions, late night sessions at the library, feedback, and so on and so forth. So, of course, the name of the journal itself signifies final draft. The final draft is signifying of the journey that a piece of writing takes from its very inception to the time it becomes final draft and gets published in the journal called Final Draft. So Tirath's idea, I think, was excellent conceptually, and we wanted to work on it, build around it. Tirath, would you show the other pages as well, so that before I ask you to reflect on it and share your thoughts and process. Please, everyone, when you download the journal, spend time, look at all the little details that Tirath and Sanmadi have put into these pages. You'll see lots of references and little inside jokes scattered all over the place. Also, the other thing I would like to highlight here is, that word that all of us writing faculty overuse in our classes, process. We just love processes so much, and we talk about it all the time. That's again something that we have extended here in the visual introduction. This is all about processes. This is all about what it takes to build processes of whether it is teaching or writing or even thinking about assignments and so on and so forth. But it is very interesting, from the point of view of the designer, I would say, because of course, all fellows have a unique writing journey, a unique experience in the YFCW program. And yet I think what Tirath and Sanmadi have managed to do well is to sort of show the common points of that process for all of us. Dear, jumping straight in, would you like to share your thoughts about how you went about this? What was it like to take your experience of being in the CW program, being a fellow, and creating sort of this relatable visual journey of an assignment for all of us?
So this idea, I think, came when I was starting out for thinking and designing the cover pages and the artwork. This was not initially meant for the introduction as such, but then my concept as a whole was that I started reflecting on Final Draft, and I noticed that it's not just about the final draft that is there. It was more of a journey for me, and it's basically like a culmination of all the things that you do in YF, and it ends with the final draft coming out. So when I reflected on my own journey, I noticed that it starts when you start your first assignment, which is what I've shown here. And then it progresses as you go on going about your assignment. The next thing that I wanted to show was the influences, that it was not just the readings that we were doing. It was also, I think, 101 things. That is starting from the stuff that is behind you in the room till the from like to the discussion that you have with your friends. The third thing that I wanted to show was what goes inside the mind, because that's something that is not like, maybe it's invisible. So putting it there that, there's this version of that person which goes inside the mind. They navigate through the things. They're trying to connect dots as the assignment is progressing. And here in the fourth panel, as you can see, that they're pulling out all the things that they have found and putting it into the assignment. Then towards the last two panels, I wanted to show the feedback process. That is the relationship between a preceptor and the student. It's much more than just a technical thing. And also the feeling, like the last panel is all about the feeling that you get when you finish your assignment. So I remember writing the description for the last panel, and it was about scaling a mountain. So I've literally just made a mountain of things that you scale in order to finish your assignment. So I think in short, that's what this was all about.
Thank you for that, Tirath. It was very insightful and very interesting for all of us. Manushita, back to you.
Yeah. So, Tirath, can you now take us to the contents page? Right. So we've looked at the visual introduction. We've shared with you the exciting process, a very collaborative, deeply collaborative process with, bringing together the student journey and the teachers' pedagogic dilemmas. There are 20 articles this time. As Ania has pointed out, we're representing two batches of the YIF Fellows, 2019 and 20. So there are 20 articles, and we have put them into 6 themes. As you can see, we have not named these themes. We have not given them words. We have just said theme 1 and so on and so forth. And Sanmati and Tirath, they again came at this point to give a visual kind of a representation of these thematics within the journal. So we didn't want to box these journals into words which might have a limited interpretation. We wanted to just broaden that space. And therefore, there are 6 beautiful artworks this time. And each of these artworks represent the titles of the journal, of the articles that are there in each of these 6 themes. So let's move to the first theme and the first artwork. So we'll just let you, immerse yourself in the colors, in the design, in the elements, and not speak. Maybe you could just take a look. So there are 4 articles that we have put together in theme 1, and these are the titles. And you will find very interesting interpretation of these titles into the artwork. We could move on to the second artwork at this point. Right. This is theme 2, which has 3 papers. Meera, Shubham, and Anika, their contributions. Again, I'll just let you take a look at them. And as you can see, the titles themselves kind of are very enticing. It'll like tempt you to explore them further, and hopefully the artwork also speaks to you as readers, as audience.
Just like the visual introduction, it's full of these little details that, the more you look at these pieces, the more you will realize the kind of thinking and work that has gone into creating them.
Yeah.
Lots of little Easter eggs.
Yeah, absolutely. When you read an article and go back to the theme artwork, you'll be able to look at many more interpretations of it. So it's a kind of a mental game also for you to, read interactively. We could move to the third theme at this point. So we have Arna, Siddharth, and Abhishek, their contributions in theme 3. And this is one of my favorites, beautifully put together. Again, like Anunay pointed out, certain references from the articles within. Once you read them, you'll be able to make those connections stronger. And at this point, I just want Sanmati to come in.
Hi.
Hi, Sanmati. So, you've worked very closely with Tirath on this edition, and all of these art work that you guys have put together. We were quite interested in the journey. So I would like you to share with us, how did you visualize the article titles in terms of design concepts, elements, and themes? What was that process for you? If you could briefly talk a little bit.
Okay. I mean, first of all, I'm very happy to see everyone, at least virtually, all together, because, when I started making these theme artwork, we didn't have any design brief. We just had, the title of the article and one-line description. And I think that actually gave us a lot of freedom, because there was no design brief, and we had the liberty to interpret things in our way. So yeah, every artwork that we designed, is very unique. There's no common process that we followed. We looked at each theme, separately, and but we did have few common, objectives that we had to follow. We made sure. I mean, I was clear from day one that each theme had a lot of concepts happening. So when we had to focus on them, I made a stab that not one, like, theme, a concept should not overpower another concept. If there are 5 concepts in a theme, all should have the same weight. Then we work with metaphors. If you look at the theme artwork, and even the title and whatever the papers are talking about, we just derive concepts from them and use them metaphorically. A few artworks were a little challenging for us, especially theme 6 artwork that you might shown in the call, in the later part of the call, where as designers we had to unlearn and learn in the process, because it was a learning. It was a honestly a good learning curve, because I when I was designing theme 1, I went back and I read the yellow wallpaper before designing or coming with a thing, and I quite remember, when I was making that artwork, I made a physical collage first to understand, because that's the first artwork I started working on. So I made a physical collage. So there was no fixed process that we followed. Everything had its own ups and downs, and there were lot of back and forth, because I was in Karur in Tamil Nadu, Tirath in Nagpur, and Anune was, I think, in Delhi when we started. So yeah, it was a very, what do you say, great journey, but we never planned anything. It was quite experimental. And honestly, this theme 3 artwork, it took me half an hour to visualize this because I was in that verge of giving up this teamwork because this is the last teamwork that I visualized. Because I had a little challenge in visualizing it, but when it came out, it was good and people liked it. You know, so yeah.
Thank you so much, Sanmati, for sharing all the details of the journey and the process. Uh, we'll have to rush through the rest of the 3 theme artworks. Maybe quickly, Tirath, if you could take us. This is the 4th. We have Jabili, Jaitun, and Sakshi, their articles on the city. And then let's move to 5th. This has Sri Rupa, Ura, and Anurag's articles. And now the final theme. This particular theme has articles which talk about equity, social justice, higher education. So you have all of that coming together in the final theme. So yeah, I think we could stop there with screen sharing and move to the next segment of today's launch. And going back to the teacher-student collaborative journey at YIF, we have brought together a beautiful panel of students, student authors who drive this journal for us. So over to you, Ratna, and you could introduce the panel to us and the stars of today's evening. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. We are delighted you are here. Before we begin with the panel, I want to remind everyone that Final Draft itself is now available for download. If you go to the YIF critical writing page and scroll down, you will see the covers of all 3 issues, including this one. So please do check it out. What we've done with the panel discussion today and our 7 panelists is divided into 2 sections. In the first section, I will be talking to Abhinaya Murthy, Jabili Sirineni, and Sankalp Khandelwal, and Anurag Khond, who has joined us. Abhinaya is from the class of 2019. Her paper, The Symbol of the Yellow Wallpaper, rereads a classic story by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which Sanmati was also talking about. The story is about a woman's struggle with neurasthenia, and Abhinaya wants to think through the workings of subjectivity, interpellation, and agency. Jabili is from the class of 2020. Her paper, Reimagining the Master Plan Stories from Hyderabad and Other Cities, argues provocatively that we need to situate urban design beyond the restrictive paradigm of the master plan and planned cities in general. Anurag is from the class of 2019. His paper on zoos and people shows fascinatingly links these to colonial domination and ecological modernism, forcing us to rethink what we do when we go to zoos. And finally, Sankalp is from the class of 2019. His paper of New Checks and Old Mates uses his childhood experience of playing chess with his father as a point of entry to ask about the dynamics of a typical middle-class Indian household. So 3 people from 2019, 1 from 2020, very diverse panel, but I would like all of you to reflect on a set of common questions. And I'm interested in knowing how CW influenced your voices as writers. And the reason for this interest is that each year when students begin CW, most of them express a discomfort with academic writing, saying that there's something about it that feels inauthentic to them in comparison, let's say, to creative writing, which they say is a more natural voice. So I'd like all of you to reflect a little bit about this this creative, critical writing distinction in view of your journey through CW. How did your writing evolve as a result of the course? What do you make of this distinction now? What is your voice as a writer? And Abhinaya, if we could begin with you, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, Ratna. And hello to everybody. It's so good to see everyone, albeit virtually. So yeah, I think also just a small comment on the artworks. I think they're absolutely lovely. It captures the themes of each of our each of our work so beautifully, and I'm so excited to see it after I download the journal myself. To respond to what Ratna had just mentioned, yes, I did have a lot of I was not very comfortable with academic writing, and to be very honest, I was not looking forward to it either. I remember my YF interview, and I remember very clearly mentioning that, oh yeah, I only read fiction. I'm not much of a nonfiction reader. And I was really encouraged to probably pick up a nonfiction book. But then I think when I entered the YF classroom and throughout the year and the years after that, I realized that these binaries are very superficial: fiction, nonfiction, academic, creative writing. I entered the YF classroom being a passionate creative writer, and I thought of academic writing as the dull cousin who's not really fun at parties. And I was wondering, how do I make this more lively and more entertaining, right? But then I realized that, and of course, like everything else at YF, my views toward writing was also like really tremendously challenged. And I evolved as a writer who was not only able to look at who was not only able to look at my own process of writing, but also rethink how I read texts and how the process of reading and writing kind of evolved. I was able to look through a more critical lens. And this is something that helped me just become a more critical, so the critical thinking, reading and writing part really kind of wove into each other. And I was able to just transform as a more as a writer who was able to not only think of the content of whatever she's reading or writing, but also where it comes from, where is it going, so the roots, causes, and destination of the entire process. So that's what I carry forward even today.
This is excellent. This is a blurb for critical writing. We shall be coming back to you, Abhinaya, for your endorsement in the future. When we were chatting before, you were saying that you were surprised you had submitted 2 things for final draft, and that one was a more creative piece, although we are setting aside the distinction, but you felt one was more creative and the other was a standard academic piece, and you were surprised that this academic piece had been chosen. So I suppose it speaks to your comfort moving from one type of genre to another. You had mentioned also, and I thought this was fascinating, that you are now at a point where you use research in your poetry writing. That poetry was something that was more natural and authentic when you came into the YIF, and now post CW, you've integrated some of those sort of conventionally critical techniques into this. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course.
How does research figure?
Yeah, absolutely. So sure, I think poetry is the most authentic expression of myself, and it was very interesting to see how the process of writing it and what goes into the poem kind of evolved the more I engaged critically with topics that I was writing about. I could take an example or two. I was writing this poem for a conference that discussed ageism against women. And the more I read on interviews with politicians and women in positions of power, and I was able to compare and contrast with interviews and conversations I had with women leading everyday life, just normal citizens, and seeing how ageism kind of weaved into their lives in comparison and contrast with the lives of women in power, and again how that contrasts with men in positions of power, and how what is the role of ageism in people of different genders. And that allowed me to really go into very specific details of the topic I was dealing with while writing the spoken word piece. And it also helped me it just made my poem a little bit more not only authentic, but also credible, and not only unique to the experiences of women I've spoken to, but also open and understanding of experiences of women I've not spoken with or did not have immediate interaction with. Even when I was writing a poem on this poem titled Eating with Hands, which is basically my relationship with food, and I spoke with expats and what they felt about Indian food. So I also read a lot about where the food we eat comes from, think about it from a post-colonial lens. And that allowed me to make the poem more interesting and actually in a way more authentic. So that's what happened with poetry. Now I'm going to start off as a master's student, an entire year of research, and I think, my entire journey with critical writing is just going to help me through the process of that. So yeah, I think that's what's happened.
Oh, and in fact, it is fascinating for me to hear that. It also reminds me of what Sanmati was saying earlier, that designing the cover, she went back and read the Charlotte Perkins Gilman story. So that once again, we see that, critical work, regardless of genre, whether it's poetry or graphic design, in fact, involves a certain kind of engagement with text, broadly defined. So I'm really delighted to hear that. And it reminds me also of something that Anurag has said, that the critical writing course also allowed his voice as a writer to evolve from someone who wrote quite convoluted, jargon-filled sentences to a style that is more, in your words, Anurag, democratic. So do you want to tell us a little bit about how the critical writing course enabled that transformation? Anurag, not Abhinaya. Thank you, Anurag, for joining us. I know that there are considerable challenges to your being here, and we are delighted to have you with us.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
And hope my background's not depressing much. It's the bone marrow ward. Yep. So firstly, thank you to the YF writing faculty for allowing my once convoluted piece to be published in your journal, and also since it's the 5th of September, the Teachers' Day, so it's actually a tribute to my former preceptor, Tritiman Bhuya. Yep. So for me, in my case, so my journey with writing began as with any other normal CBSE going schoolboy. So in school, there were different teachers who had different demands. For instance, till class 6, I was sort of like questioned by my teachers. Why do you write so simple? Use more jargonistic words. Then I began following the greater Shashi Tharoor with his nihilo fluxification, sesquipedalianism, and then Farrago, blah blah blah. So I began typing those, and which cost me in my English paper in 12, where the teacher said, like, go simple. So again, with this thought that, like, using jargon made you more wise or seem more academic. So this perception was tied to me in my undergrad years, until I came until I met my preceptor who had said that as a writer, there lies some responsibility to your readers. So in fact, take a breath, go slow, and just and try to democratize your area. So and also just like as Abhinay mentioned, so I often dwell in this binary between a creative writing for me, which was more lumpen in nature, as compared to academic writing, which was more grandiose and like aristocratic, if I may say. But then it was through my preceptor I learned that these two styles can be merged. And they can be both fun as well as, one can be both lumpen as well as, not lumpen, I'll say, one can be both simple as well as more meaningful through writing. So that's how my journey. So that's how I began to improve my style. And as I had mentioned earlier in our previous discussion, so I also follow these news ports, like the print and the print. So there are some of these journalists, they tend to portray very serious issues in a humorous manner.
Yeah.
So that's how my writing had evolved.
Yeah. And it's interesting for me to hear you say that, because when I was working on your piece, I could see that, we had similar conversations about further democratizing a piece of writing for
Yes.
final draft. So this is something that we tell all our students as well, that you don't learn how to write in the 9 months of CW. This is a lifelong journey, and that these transformations and lessons will continue. But what you said, Anurag, about that you can do both, that these don't have to be working in silos. I wanted to ask Jabili about this, because Jabili, you said something quite interesting when we spoke earlier, that your ELM and CW experience that year at the YIF was overlapping in such provocative and empowering ways, initially confusing, but then empowering. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about that. Again, reflecting on how that overlap what effect it has had on your voice as a writer now.
So before the critical writing course started at the YF, I always thought of the voice. I did not think so much of the voice question. I thought that it comes naturally to you when you sit down. You know what you're going to write about and what your voice is going to be. And throughout the course as well, I did not really have to think so much about the voice until I started to write my final paper for the critical writing course. This was the time when our ELM was also happening, and this was the final stages of the ELM. And my ELM was constituted of writing short fiction. And almost on an alternate day basis, I had to keep switching back and forth. And that was really challenging for me, because I was trying very hard to segregate these. And I didn't know how subjective or objective my voice should be. I didn't know how intimate I needed to be with the writing, because in fiction, I could take that freedom of intimacy. But while I was writing academic writing, I didn't know if I have to be really detached from it.
Right.
So this was a constant, but I realized that, so while through the course of critical writing, we did a lot of critical reading as well. And we did not just read academic works. So we read a lot of fiction. We also watched a lot of visual text. So there was a diverse genre of things that we were looking at. And in fact, I think that sort of helped me bridge this, block in my mind that it had to be segregated. And the overlap that was causing me, like, I thought that the overlap between the short fiction and my paper was causing my story to become overanalyzed and was causing my paper to become digressional. But when I got out of this block, when I stopped segregating them, putting them into boxes, it, like Anurag said, for example, I was able to, I think, find in both the pieces of writing a very unique sort of flow that wasn't there before when I was trying to, segregate and name the words.
Yeah. So would you say, because, one of the things that through just these past few minutes, we've been talking about, I think, stylistic voice, right? About fiction and nonfiction. But of course, that is linked so deeply to your intellectual voice, right? Sort of form and content are so linked, form structures, content. So if we were to think about your intellectual voice now, where is that post CW? If it can, and I don't mean to create too great a distinction between a stylistic or intellectual voice, but if one can speak of an intellectual voice, what is that for you now?
So I became aware of the intellectual voice being something that affects the writing voice so much during the course. And I realized that my voice has so Pratik, my preceptor, pointed out to me.
Who's joined us as a panelist today. Pratik, welcome. Hi, Pratik. Yeah, what a heroic, thank you so much. Are you joining us from New York?
Yeah, despite the difference in time.
Are you in New York?
Yes,
oh my gosh, we have international panelists, you guys. This is amazing. Welcome. Very fancy new glasses. This is all New York effect.
It's 7 in the morning here, so I'm trying to keep myself awake.
Pratik loves mornings. So Jabili, what did Pratik teach you?
Yeah, so Pratik pointed out me a couple of times about how my writing had a lot of questions. Like there were a lot of questions, and essentially, I wouldn't essentially circle back to them or elaborate on them. And it always, the question was always very interesting to me as a powerful form of writing. But I realized that in academic writing, when you put a lot of questions and it sometimes that you don't ponder on those questions yourself.
Right.
So what I realized that is that my writing could be more argumentative and less interrogative. And that sort of helped a lot because I kept analyzing those questions. And if I could argue, if I could elaborate on them, and I was doing that. And I think that made those pieces of writing really self-sufficient, I would say.
Right.
And that was something that was very empowering to me.
Yeah. I think that's very interesting. We've talked earlier briefly about this role of questions in writing and how what stylistic and analytic purpose they can serve, and we won't go into it in detail. But I'm reminded of a debate that Martha Nussbaum, a philosopher, and Judith Butler, a critical theorist, had, because Butler famously writes in a series of questions, which Martha Nussbaum said was a bit of an act of an imposter because she never answered them. And Butler's followers said that no, the questions themselves were extremely transformative and revelatory. So in light of that, it's interesting for me to hear you talk about the way that you have negotiated questions in your own writing, both stylistically and in terms of thinking. And speaking of this creative, critical overlap, Sankalp, you came into CW as a fiction writer and you left more comfortable, or maybe not more comfortable, but you have now found you are currently working more with non-fiction. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that, and also about the way that CW helped you help challenge your assumptions about the writing process and what was your natural voice?
Yeah, Ratna. So before Ashoka, I'd always read fiction, and I thought that I'm a fiction writer. That was almost a default for me. And over the last few years after Ashoka, I have gradually moved away from fiction to non-fiction writing. I'm almost exclusively reading non-fiction now, and I'm writing more of non-fiction as well. So I've moved away from that. And I find—
You want to thank CW for having changed your life? A little plug?
No, yeah, absolutely. Actually, yeah, if I have to trace the evolution of the transition, I think it began with Ashoka and with critical writing, and especially with the assignment that I submitted to the journal, which was narrative nonfiction, a form that I had not experimented with before. So yeah, I think in the process of getting us to try different genres, it challenged my assumption about who I was as a writer and what I wanted to write about.
Okay.
I'm going to
yeah. Thank you, Sean.
So I'm going to come in here and I'll be moderating the next part of this panel discussion. And the broad questions that we're dealing with involve, how has critical writing challenged your assumptions about society, about beliefs you have held? And I think, Sankalp, since you mentioned that, critical writing challenged your assumptions about writing, how was that related to, how it challenged your assumptions about, the world around you? Did that happen? Because as faculty, we assume that this is an integral part of what we do. So could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. And so I think the course challenged quite a few assumptions. And I think the first assumption was about the course itself. I think the name critical writing is a misnomer itself. And let me tell you why I say that. I came to Ashoka with extensive experience as an editor and writer. So when I was introduced to the course, and the first class itself, where we were given a prompt to write and exchange feedback, I thought I've done so much of this already. And is this course useful for me? So I remember I marched to Aniha's office and I was like, is this course useful? Will it have any takeaways for somebody like me? And Aniha said something that has stuck with me ever since. She said, one of the lessons you would learn from the course is humility by just sitting in the classes writer and discussing it with peers who don't have as much experience in writing as you do. Aniha also said that if you think you are an expert in writing anyway, you don't have to spend as much time on it. Just get your A's and spend as much time as you need. I didn't get the A's, but that's, I think, a story for a different time. But I think over the course of the year, the critical writing course, revealed itself as something much more about critical writing. It's more about critical thinking and as much about critical reading, and you do it through themes. So even if you don't have even if you're an expert in writing, you can, for instance, learn about these themes. And I think another assumption was just what is possible in the space of a classroom. One of the assignments we got later in the year was a rant, and there's a lot of talk about experiments with genres and so on. But to have a rant as a critical text to be discussed in a classroom was something surprising and new for me. And I think not just the form, but even the content was new, because one of the rants that we picked up for critical analysis in the class was a rant about the course itself. And boy, it involved so much of frustration with the course. So yeah, I think that was an assumption about what is possible in a classroom. That assumption was challenged too by the course.
Yeah, and I think this also brings us to a larger question, Sankalp, because I think that when we are thinking about critical writing, clearly the writing process is then linked to examining the conditions within which you're writing. And this, in fact, I think is a theme that Prasenjit, you go into. So to bring you into the conversation, Prasenjit, just for the rest of you, I'll introduce him. So Prasenjit Patil is from YF20, and his paper is titled Caste in Higher Education, Examining and Redefining Affirmative Action. And Prasenjit, I'm curious to know that, when we tackle this question, taking from what Sankalp is saying, that how does critical writing make us reflect on the conditions in which we write? And these are not just the conditions of the classroom, but also society involving its own power dynamics. And I think one of the things that you go into in your paper is to talk about how critical thinking has to lead to social change, right? And how the process of writing your paper was also about thinking of how we can improve caste-based reservation policies in Indian higher education. So could you tell us a little more about that?
Right. As Sankalp mentioned, that critical writing is also about critical thinking and critical reading. It also involves like questioning the received knowledge and the discourse with a goal to challenge the status quo. And one of the crucial ways in which I attempted to do this was theorizing my experiences and experientializing theory from a social standpoint of dominant and subordinate groups. But that being said, this is not enough, because discourse cannot be termed as an end goal. And we need to substantiate what we are analyzing. We have to move from an analytical point of view to an action-oriented approach. And that is something which I attempted to do in my essay, which was about caste in higher education, which, of course, I try to provide a socially and historically grounded argument about why affirmative action is necessary. And the paper also elaborates on what are the existing roadblocks towards the implementation of the policies, especially for SC and ST students. But I think one of the interesting pieces that I had to work on that essay was also about thinking as to what could be the possible systemic solutions to define those affirmative actions. And of course, when I had to think in terms of solutions, it also involved about taking different players in the ecosystem who hold the positions of dominant groups, who hold the positions of subordinate groups, and what role do they have to take into picture. So I think, yes, we also have to move from towards building critical consciousness and how we could bring that into the discourse. And also like the dynamics between action and reflection. So I think these tools have also significantly, I think looking back, these tools have also significantly provided an agency to make their opinions and experiences challenge the status quo and also transcend from local to global.
Okay, thanks for that, Prasenjit. And I think that, I mean, this is also quite reflective for us as faculty members because, you know, this question is quite interesting that can we conceptualize critical writing as not just a space for, you know, reflection, but also action. And then as soon as we ask that question, we're thinking of, you know, from what position are we thinking of that? You know, whether, you know, what sort of, you know, what is our social location in terms of caste, gender, and so on and so forth. And how does that influence how we're thinking? And perhaps this sort of broadens the question to, again, something all the faculty are quite interested in, which is how do we teach critical writing, right? And what does critical writing exactly aim to do, right? Is it, you know, developing voice? Is it developing critical reflection? Is it developing social action and praxis? And I think, Shubham, you know, you have also taught writing after your critical writing journey. And your paper, in fact, to introduce Shubham, Shubham Gupta is from the batch of 2019. And in his paper, he talks about the power of imagination and how stories help us to access our emotions and make sense of our mundane experiences. But what is interesting, Shubham, in what we were discussing earlier, is that you are also interested in the project of language education. Like, how do we teach language? How do we teach writing? So what has critical writing sort of given you in terms of that? And what has been your experience as a teacher?
Hi, good evening. So there are two things that I think the critical writing course left me with. The first one, of course, as you said, was the question of language. My preceptor was Anuj Gupta. So our theme was broadly about the relationship between languages and realities. And that's a question that has stayed with me all these past 3 years. Even today, I was reading Saussure, a literary theorist, and he talks about a similar thing, about how the language that we speak, in a way, determines the world that we live in. So that one of the first texts that we read in the critical writing course was the Constituent Assembly debates while to discuss the language policy of India. And that in itself opened up so many questions that have no resolution really, because we talked in the classroom mainly in English, and that sort of reflected the privilege that we had. But then even within that group, there were other questions that could have arisen. One, of course, was the question of grammar that we talked about a lot. And there's a difference between descriptive grammar and prescriptive. Prescriptive is when you tell someone that this is the only right way to do things. And descriptive is when you simply let people be and describe how they talk, right? So one is sort of giving rules, the other is letting it just flow. So we talked about that a lot, and we realized that we've been correcting each other's grammars for no reason whatsoever. So the question of language is, of course, one, the kind of the language that you use, and second, the kind of language that you use as well. So that was the first question that we dealt with extensively, which was about language. And of course, it's intimately tied to the question of writing itself. But the second thing that really, as you mentioned, stuck with me was, can writing even be taught? Because when, as a student, you dread the drafting process, you dread the feedback process, you don't know what you're doing wrong. And as I transitioned into being a teacher, I realized that because I'd been a student the previous year, I realized that I did not particularly enjoy being told that this is what you should do. What I found useful in giving feedback or taking feedback was that we need to be able to let other writers think for themselves. And that, I think, has really been the basis of teaching and learning writing for me, which is the ability to question certain things and to be able to write them down in a certain manner. So yeah, these two ideas of language and teaching writing, they really started with the CW, but they haven't stopped.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, from all the responses that have come in so far, we have really broadened the frame of, what critical writing is and does, right? From, the voice to the social. But another, I think, interesting area that, Arna's paper goes into is the grappling with emotion. And I think, and the grappling with emotion is connected to personal and internal transformation, which is always sort of linked with that sense of the social, I suppose. And Arna, would you like to tell us a little more about this part of the critical writing journey for you? And just to, tell everyone about Arna's paper, Arna Chogani is from the batch of 2019. And the paper titled The Heart of the Mind, The Rationale of Forgiveness, questions the entrenched divide between the rational and the emotional, and argues that there exists osmosis between the two. So tell us more, Arna.
Thank you so much, Shayan. And I hope I'm audible well. Yeah, thank you. Shayan, firstly, before I start, I think all through the process of planning this panel, I've been saying that what an honor it's been to be associated in the same panel where we have academic writers and we have creative writers, and kind of me in between, who is more of a PPT writer that I call myself. But the process of writing, and when I say call myself a PPT writer, I really mean that I've always been more of a writing for documentation purpose. And so I would know what I wanted to say and then kind of put it across in the PPT. But this self-transformation that you really did speak about, Shayan, appeared for me via this process of critical writing, because Anunay, who is my preceptor, really concentrated and told us so much about how writing can be not just a process of documentation, but a process of exploration. And my paper was actually born out of this process of exploration. I was having, at one point, the toughest time of my life, because at one side, I was being pulled towards this rational side, this side of me that was more critical and thinking from my mind. And on the other side, I was kind of in this process of a personal transformation, a spiritual transformation. And so I found myself really being divided into two, and I didn't see that in coexistence. And at that point, I remember asking Anna, like, can I do something about this in my paper? Can I use this paper as a journey to understand some of these questions that are there in my mind? And in fact, I had no idea what the conclusion of this paper would be like when I started writing it. I just started writing it, and it happened to quieten a little bit of this inner chatter, this inner noise that was going on within me. And so for me, that has really been one of the themes that has stood out so deeply, for writing to be a process of reflection, a process of exploration about what's going on within myself, and kind of trying to put that on paper. I think the second thing, Shayan, that really stood out for me through the process of writing in critical writing really has been this understanding of how I could caveat my voice. I wasn't really confident of even having a voice of my own, but I think through the process of writing, what I realized is I can look at two very credible sources, really two credible authors who have such knowledge in their respective fields, look at them in association with each other, and then kind of try to make some meaning out of it, but add my own voice to it. Find a rather imperfect voice amongst this very credible universe of voices. And that confidence of just being able to just hear my own voice and put that across on paper has been a hugely transformative experience for me. And I think for me, critical writing, my paper, though it talks about forgiveness, it combines different areas. It combines the metaphysical and the spiritual. I talk about history and I talk about pop culture, which are often things that I never would have seen in association with each other. So for me, critical writing has also been this process where I could look at this multidisciplinary universe that we often associate the YF with, but look at it and try to make some meaning out of it. Try to see this multiverse and see, hey, do I see some Venn circles here? Can I make some meaning out of this? And can I take that dialogue forward by my own interpretation of all of this that I'm seeing together with each other? And so for me, that's really been my journey with from being this this complete bullet point writer, really, to being a writer who has identified an imperfect voice, but a voice nevertheless.
Thank you, Anna. And I think that sort of sums up, what this journal is really about. And I think on that sort of multidisciplinary, multi-genre and multi-sensory note, we can perhaps move on to the Q&A. So Satyendra, would you like to take it forward?
So I think, what Anna said, it sort of, acts as a very beautiful conclusion of what all the panelists were talking about. And as I was listening to all of you, it sort of, kept bringing back several memories from the critical writing classroom where students have said, several interesting things about writing. So whether it's about finding one's voice or the personal, the political, the sociological, intellectual voice, activism, what is the purpose of criticality? I think Anna sort of very interestingly concluded by saying how, writing is nothing but finding a space where all of it can come together and all of it can, become one organic, unified whole for us to be carried to, for us to explore further. So I think we have a bit of time for Q&A, and if anybody in the audience has any question for any of our panelists in specific, or a general question about, writing or what the panelists were talking about, maybe you could raise your hands and we can continue having this conversation in the Q&A format. You could also type out your question in the chat box. If you don't want to raise your hand and spell out your question, that's also okay.
Satyendra, would it be possible for me to assert panelist privilege?
Absolutely.
Just while people are thinking of questions, one thing that I'm curious about, very cliched question, but I'm genuinely curious for any of the panelists who cares to answer. What would you tell the current class about the year ahead of them? They've done about 6 or 7 classes so far. They may not, I hope some of them are attending, but looking back, what would you tell? Anything, either, from the most mundane to the most profound. What can they look forward to? What should they prepare for? Anything that comes to your mind. Arna, oh yes, please, Anurag. Yeah.
Yep. So firstly, two things came to mind. So while I was preparing my points, so this song just came to my mind. There's a song from the 80s. Likhe jo khat tujhe, jo teri yaad mein hazar rang ke sitare ho gaye. So just write, likho, just write, and let that bloom into the hazar rang ke sitare. So for me, to the current batch, it doesn't matter whether you are Shashi Tharoor or you are someone like Arun Anand or Shekhar Gupta, just write. And secondly, so I noticed that the cover that there was a quote by the famous author Chimamanda that these tales or these writing can sort of humiliate and as well as humanize. So last year, so as you know about the events which are unfolding in Afghanistan, so we have sort of like with these events, I mean the way they're portrayed in the media, they have sort of dehumanized the country. I mean a land of Silk Route, of culture, as the graveyard of empires, or just like the Taliban's. But so as also remind of the famous tale Kabuli Wala, and also the movie by which had a Balraj Sahni in that epic role. So I think stories. So also like as writers, it is also our. I mean, although we should think critically, but at the same time, for the sake of criticality, we shouldn't sacrifice our humanness at the altar. I'll just say that.
Anurag, thank you. You're absolutely right, because in terms of just right, our students often after couple of classes say, my God, we're paralyzed now because you've told us we have to pay attention to this and pay attention to that. And, we don't know how to write. And so I think that yours is a very useful instruction. Incidentally, it reminds me of what Susan Sontag, the famous American essayist, said. She said, love words, agonize over sentences, and pay attention to the world. And when you were talking about Afghanistan, I thought, absolutely. So thank you for that. Anyone else? What would you tell the current batch of newbies? Yes, Arna.
Thank you, Ratna. And in fact, I'm just taking Anurag's voice a little forward. And for me, it took me a couple of classes to understand that being critical does not mean being detached.
Right.
And therefore, you could bring the whole of yourself into your critical writing assignments. Probably the only one thing that I added then after bringing the whole of myself was allowing myself to sit on the fence, which means not really deciding, not really, just bringing my past experience into what I want to say, but also allowing this process to kind of take that dialogue forward. And the second thing, it's a paper that we read in class that Anunay makes us read at the start of every batch, which is Shitty First Drafts. Because first drafts are really, they can be shitty, and just allowing yourself to just put everything on paper and not agonizing over the fact that this is not a perfect draft, because it just cannot be. And just allowing that was huge learning for me as well.
Yeah. In fact, just yesterday, I was talking to a student, and those mandatory, the first lot of office hours, and saying exactly this: you must learn to relax into the process of it and not measure accomplishments sort of paper by paper, but wait for, a good number of months or even years to pass to see how your writing and thinking and critical consciousness are changed. So yes, I think students put a lot of pressure on themselves.
Adding to what Arna said, I was actually thinking about it. The journal is called Final Draft for a reason, right?
Yes. For which we must thank Anunay, you guys. This is his brilliant title. So thank you, Anunay.
Thank you, Anunay. Yeah, so first drafts, I think, at least as somebody who, for all those people, for all the students who are getting into academic writing just now, or working on papers for the first time, I completely understand how you feel. And the first draft itself can be super overwhelming. And you might want to think that, oh, but I have to make it perfect. You don't have to make it perfect. Please let your preceptor work with you on the process of writing. And as cliche as it might sound, trust the process, because I think the greatest gift of all from this course or from any act of writing could be to see some amount of transformation happening. And borrowing from BoJack Horseman, actually, that there is actually no sense of a pleasure in looking for closure. If there is no closure when you're working on paper, that's fine. Think of it as an episodic series, and there will be something at the end of it. So, and also I think writing is really, like, as Toni Morrison said, Toni Morrison, again, as a writer, was introduced to me through critical writing, through Satyendra sir. Thank you. She's my favorite now. She said that writing is really a way of thinking. It's not just feeling, but thinking about things that are unresolved, mysterious, problematic, or I think it went as, or just as sweet. And borrowing from what Anurag said earlier in our earlier discussions, you need not, complicate your writing process, even if it does seem very complex. One of the papers in this journal is the idea of birthdays. And I think that's such an interesting and sweet and mundane topic that you can really explore from a critical lens. So yeah, just write, trust the process, and enjoy the entire year, I guess.
I think that's a good thing for people to remember, especially at this stage, because I think students, as I was saying, are stressed about how they're going to do, because they've suddenly been introduced to notions of criticality and of reading in a way that they're not accustomed to it. So I think they're floundering a bit. So they do forget that there's a sweetness and an enjoyment in addition, of course, to it being so transformative, so empowering, and by the way, so horrible and frustrating and such drudgery. I was during our opening town hall panel, I was telling the students about Dorothy Parker, who said, "I hate writing, but I love having written." So we might as well also be honest about that. The process of transformation and discovery, etc., can be pretty awful, but one gets to a hopefully better place. Satyendra, I'm going to, sorry, I didn't mean to take over, but I was so curious about this.
Thanks, Ratna. Actually, I think we are running short of time and I think we have to wrap up the session now. Can you guys hear me? Because there seems to be some problem with my Zoom account. It has sort of frozen for me. But can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, not see you, Satyendra. Also, I think Astha may have raised her hand.
Oh, okay. So quickly, can we get Astha in, Satyendra, before we move on? Is that okay? Astha, please.
Astha can go ahead. I think Satyendra has dropped off.
Okay.
Yeah. Astha, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're muted. So if you can unmute yourself and.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, now you
yeah,
are.
I just went through the session, and I just wanted to tell you that I joined YF being a non-writer, typical engineer. Have I never wrote anything, even a single article, or I was even someone who had never read much. But this critical writing course has done a lot for me. I was there in Anuj sir's classes, and he actually told me in one of the one-on-ones that just open up and just write down whatever you think about. And and those words just turned out to be a paper, and things went really well. And this is the course from where I picked that confidence. And today, for even for my new work, the kind of things I'm doing, I'm just writing documents, I'm just writing articles, and they're going so well. Because now I've started, I've stopped thinking about the outcome, but I started writing actually, and going in the pace. Like most of you have said, that just trust the process and just write down. It's okay, whatever the outcome may be. So again, thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to read the final draft as well. Great work, guys. Thanks.
Again, final draft is now available for download. Go to the YIFCW page, and it is all there now for you to see.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Astha. Monishita, do you want to, is Satyendra with us? I'm not sure.
I don't think so.
No, I think he's, so Monishita, would you like to?
Yeah. Do we have any more questions? We have a little bit of time. No? Okay. Then I will go ahead and wrap up this session. We have not overshot time. I think that's great work, because a lot of people had to talk, and we all kept to our time tabs. That's great. And thank you very much for everybody who have joined us today. I would like to, on behalf of the critical writing program, I would like to thank a number of people without whom this would have not been possible today. Aniha, Dean of YF, for her active involvement and insightful guidance with every step of the process, starting from the conceptualization of the editorial policy to reviewing every paper in the issue, providing detailed feedback, and sometimes, putting her through timelines which were crazy. Aniha, you shouldered the responsibility so that we could have the freedom. Thank you so much. We would also like to thank Ashoka's administration and leadership for their continued support and encouragement with this journal. It's Ashoka's first multidisciplinary journal of student writing. Special thanks to Professor Aparna Vaidik, Professor Ritvik Agarwal, and Kimson from our YF program team for being part of the editorial board and for participating in the Herculean task of reviewing the long listed papers. Thank you, Shiv and Prateek, our very dear critical writing faculty members who have worked with us through the last year, for sharing the responsibility of this issue. Your enthusiasm and ideas really kept us going. The journal, as well as the launch event, would not have seen the light of the day without the tireless support of the YF program team members, Ayushi, Kimson, Tushar, and Vivek. Without their administrative and logistical support, none of our ideas would have ever materialized. A big thanks to Mohit, Sandeep, and Deepak from communications, and Anuja and Shambhari from outreach team for handling the publicity of the journal launch. You made our hard work visible to the world. Thanks a lot. Our gratitude to the fellows from the batch of 2019 and 2020 who sent in their papers for this issue. Your enthusiastic response to our call for papers really motivated us through the process. To all the authors who are getting published in our third issue, congratulations and thank you for working so patiently with us as you have made multiple rounds of revisions to your papers. To Tirath and Sanmadi for taking care of all the visual components of the issue, cover design, artwork, visual introduction, typesetting, and for sharing the design process with us today. To Claire for taking care of the proofreading work, and to all our panelists who joined us today to share with us their experience of critical writing program. Above all, a big thanks to all of you for taking out time on a Sunday afternoon and joining us for the launch. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience. And we hope that you will enjoy reading through the third issue of Final Draft. The issue can be downloaded on the YF webpage, as Ratna has pointed out. I hope you enjoyed today's event. And once again, a very happy Teachers' Day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Manishita.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Anurag. I hope all's going well.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, good. Very nice to see you.
So should we end the meeting now?
Should we, can we log off? Should we?
Yeah. I'll
All
end
right.
ending it now.
Okay, thank you, Krishnajit, for all the technical stuff. Thank you so much, especially the last minute stuff.
I
Thank
think
you,
we'll, we'll stop the recording also.
Oh, can we? No, we can't do that.
I stopped it.
Yeah, we were still streaming on YouTube. No, I think we still, so I think we can just stop it.
Stop it now.
See you.
All right, thanks, Shayan. See
Thanks,
you.
Ratna.
Thank you, Ratna.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody,
Thank
still attending.